And I actually have the old book, The Lion's Den, Inside the Lion's Den.
Yeah.
And I remember getting that book and seeing you in there and just following you guys. I was actually early in my, wrestling in high school and getting into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And, we all, a lot of people obviously probably seen your documentary. That was amazing.
Yeah.
So really just hearing those old days of coming through, with the Lion's Den and Ken and all that. And it was just an amazing story, but kind of, take us through, you don't have to go all through the entire history, but I like to start with Inside the Lion's Den because that was my introduction to you and
Sure.
the training, so coming through there, with Bob Shamrock and all of that, and then being introduced, how is that as far as like it taking over your life in that aspect?
It was really powerful. Like just having, the purpose and the focus, like something so powerful. Because if you screwed it up, you were going to get, your ass kicked, which is always a problem. And then having that community there, like some people support you, and when you're bleeding, like fix you up, and that was the first time I really experienced that. Was when I entered the Lion's Den, and even though it was tough, brutal, we were beating the hell out of each other, and nobody really knew about fighting at the time. It was extraordinary to be amongst modern day warriors, like fighting it out, and then you find out at the end of the day, everyone's a martial artist, everyone's family man, everyone's dad, like everyone's just trying to be successful in this career of fighting.
Some from the documentaries, right? You had a rough start, right? As a kid. Yeah. And how much was the structure important of martial arts, like getting into martial arts for you?
Yeah, I think it was super important. I mean, I know it was super important. It just now my life is automatic, so I don't think about it. But that was definitely a thing I was missing, as a youth, having good structure, good parental, guidance, team sports, stuff like that. That's why I think team sports are so good, because you learn to function in, high stress environments, celebrate, have camaraderie, community, goals. And I didn't get into team sports because I always get kicked out and had, some type of emotional issue or some, physical altercation. But when mixed martial arts came along, it was to me, what a new sport was. Like it was the same stuff. I didn't look at it any differently. That's what I thought sports was as we were studying it. So it was cool. Like and that was one of my dreams, was to become a champion sports athlete. I just didn't really have a sport except for boxing that I, watched.
Yeah, I mean, some of the other what popped in my head when we knew you were coming on the show was I remember I have like a library of just like DVD-ROM, like ripped videos, and there was one of you that it was a seminar you did. I don't know where it was, but it was a seminar, and you spoke about nutrition specifically. Mm-hmm. And I remember from Inside the Lion's Den book, there's a section on nutrition and diet and all that. Do you still eat raw chicken? Is the question.
I don't. I've actually, only had raw chicken like a couple of times. And apparently I could do it at that time, but no, but I just eat good. And I still stick with those like very simple principles that I learned fighting, which is to be training all the time. You don't really want to be full, right? So you always want to be kind of, just enough fuel to do the next thing and be comfortable. So I learned to eat lean, and, that's where the size of my palm of my hand came in, that idea of just eating what you need in that time, whenever that time is. So it seems to be working. It was more of the need in martial arts at the time, but now, I do like intermittent fast. I just eat whenever I'm hungry. And if I'm not hungry, I don't eat. I'm like, well, why? I'm just sitting here hanging out. Like, why do I need to eat anything? Drink some natural juice or have a piece of fruit. Like, I don't really need to eat anything. So, my mindset remains the same, but the application is different, because it needs different these days.
Yeah, I just remember the comment section lighting up, just specifically about that. It's like, oh my God, he eats raw chicken.
Yeah.
What is that?
It's like, and people didn't even know what salmonella was back then.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Right? Yeah.
Everybody said the secret to the Shamrock diet, eat raw chicken. People were going nuts in the comments. It was just funny.
Yeah. Well, I see at that time it was very mystical, just like martial arts were, I'd say through the 70s and 80s and, until the UFC really came along, it was kind of fantasy stuff. Mm-hmm. And, in that world, there's just a lot of, people are like, well, what's really going on? The truth is, like, we didn't know what was going on. We were, you know, I figured it out pretty quick because I grew up on the streets, you know, and I always asked questions and I took notes that people didn't have the answer, you know, but they were in a position of leadership where they were the toughest guy in town, or they were, you know, the coach. And even though they didn't have an answer, they'd be like, well, you know, this is the answer. And I'd be like, well, hey, when you start thinking about it, you know, they just didn't want to admit that they didn't know how to fight.
Right. And I mean, you had a lot to do with the foundations of mixed martial arts, right? In the United States, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I came along at a pivotal time when, you know, they did the pay-per-view kind of, you know, scandal and someone's going to die, and they had great pay-per-view numbers. And it was an instant hit, the UFC. But then we got this big, huge social backlash, getting kicked off cable and, you know, getting negative headlines. And so the sport took a huge nosedive. And I just happened to come along like, hello, right at that time. And, you know, it's a great time in that the opportunity was endless. Like, you know, if you had talent, you could talk, you could fight, you could do anything, you know, there was huge opportunity. But huge opportunity at that time was, you know, tiny. It just wasn't a lot of money.
Right.
And then, you know, the last thing about me getting into the sport, like I love the idea of sporting and competing and having all that stuff, but I couldn't keep relationships, and I couldn't keep, because of all my, you know, child trauma and social issues, I didn't have the skills to maintain these healthy relationships that are required to do all these extraordinary things for long periods of time. And it was through martial arts I learned all that, you know, that I started teaching and communicating, and like, you know, like, oh wow, you know, this guy feels like I do, and wow, his arm hurts too after we did that. So it was a great human connector for me, the martial arts training, and then having the mindset of martial arts, even in the midst of this crazy fighting where I could tell people didn't know what they were talking about. They're like, yes, and this and that. And I'm like, hey, but listen, I understand biomechanics. And I'd ask questions, you know, and they probably thought, oh, Frank's a total, you know, dick. Like, why would he do that? But I was studying the art of fighting. So to me, it wasn't about martial arts, or like, you know, it wasn't about the martial arts journey that they'd been on or what they learned. Like, it wasn't disrespecting anybody. Just needed the truth so Ken wouldn't punch me in the head and, you know, break my face.